The stage left her at the crossroads outside Delham before she'd gotten her bag off the rack. The driver hadn't said a word. He just looked at her ticket, looked at the sign, and that was that. She stood in the road for a moment with her bag at her feet and the dust still settling and the sound of the horses fading west. The sky was the color of old pewter. Somewhere behind the hills there was snow coming, and she could feel it in the way the air sat still and heavy around her ankles. The letter had said 4 miles north of town on the road past the mill. She picked up her bag and started walking. She had the letter memorized by now. She'd read it enough times on the train from Cincinnati that the paper had gone soft at the folds. It wasn't long. A man named Aldrich needed someone who could cook and manage a household through the winter and possibly beyond. He was a cattleman. The work was real work. He hadn't dressed it up. She'd appreciated that more than she could explain to anyone who asked. No one had asked. She walked the 4 miles and saw the mill and turned north and walked another quarter hour before she saw the fence posts. Most of them leaning, one knocked clean over and not replaced, the wire drooping between them like something that had given up trying. The gate at the road was wired shut rather than latched. She unwound it and went through and rewound it behind her. The house sat at the end of a long drive, low and weathered, the porch railing missing 2 boards on the left side. Someone had stuffed burlap into one of the upper windows. The barn beyond the house was in better shape, which told her something she filed away for later. She knocked. Nothing. She waited. The wind moved through the cottonwoods at the creek edge and shook what was left of their leaves. She knocked again. The door opened about 6 inches and stopped. The man who looked out at her was not old. That was the first thing she noticed. She'd pictured old for some reason. Gray, bent, slow. He wasn't any of those things. Or had been 40 once, and now carried more years in his face than his body knew what to do with. Dark hair going rough, eyes that had decided a while back not to give much away. He looked at her bag. He looked at her face. He said nothing. "I'm answering your letter," she said, "the one you placed through the Hendricks agency." A pause. "That was 4 months ago." "I know." Another pause, longer. He seemed to be thinking about something that had nothing to do with her. Then he opened the door the rest of the way and stepped back. She went in. The kitchen was the first room she entered, and she spent the 3 seconds it took to cross it reading everything she could. The stove was cold. There was a pot on it with something dried in the bottom that had been there for days. 2 plates on the table, one of them still with a heel of bread on it. A coat hung over the back of a chair. Boots on the floor caked with mud, drying without being cleaned. The firewood box next to the stove was empty. She set her bag down by the wall. "Where's the woodpile?" she said. He looked at her for a moment behind the barn. She went and got the wood. She made 3 trips before the box was full enough. He was still standing where she'd left him when she came back inside, though he'd moved the coat off the chair and sat down in it, and he was watching her without appearing to watch her, which was a thing she recognized. She built the fire and got it going and filled the pot from the pump at the sink and put it back on the stove. "Do you have flour?" she said. He nodded toward the pantry. The pantry was in a state. Cans without labels, a bag of flour that had been rolled shut but not folded properly, gone stiff at the top. Dried beans, a half-empty tin of coffee, cornmeal. She thought about what she could do with all of it, and in which order, and turned back to the kitchen. "How many head are you running?" she said. 37. "Any calving before spring?" 3 heifers I'm watching. She nodded. "Do you have a hand?" Something crossed his face, too quick to read cleanly. Not this winter. She didn't push it. She noted it, and put it with the other things she'd noted. The 2 plates on the table, the coat that had been there long enough to flatten the chair back, the way he stood in his own kitchen like a man passing through it. And she went about making dinner. She fed them both. He ate without comment, which she did not take as rudeness. She'd eaten enough silent meals in her life to know that silence at the table could mean a lot of things, and not all of them were unkind. After she washed the plates, she found a lamp and lit it. She asked where she'd be sleeping, and he walked her to a small room off the back of the kitchen, narrow, with a window that looked out at the barn. There was a bed with a quilt on it and a washstand. He'd cleared a space for her things. She didn't know when he'd done that. Before she arrived, she thought, which meant he'd expected her to come even if he hadn't seemed like it. She thanked him. He nodded and went down the hall. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the dark square of the window and thought about where she was and what she'd come to. She'd been a wife before. She knew what that word meant in the practical sense. The fires and the floors and the meals, and the mending and the counting of things, and the watching of weather, and the silent bargains a house runs on. She'd been good at it. She hadn't been unhappy. But then there'd been the winter of 1889, when her husband went to check the upper fence line in a storm and didn't come back. And by the time they found him 3 days later, the cold had done its work. And she'd spent the year after that, learning what it meant to be a woman alone, in a world that didn't have a convenient place for her. She wasn't looking for another marriage. She was looking for something to do with her hands that mattered. She blew out the lamp and lay down and listened to the wind. In the morning, she woke before light and went out to the barn. The cows were there, 8 of them, in the stalls. Dairy cows, mostly. A mix of breeds, stocky and calm. They needed milking. She found the pails on the shelf where they belonged, which told her that someone had once kept this place with care. She started at the near end and worked her way down. She was on the 4th cow when she heard him come in. He stopped inside the door and stood there. "I would have done that," he said. "I know," she said. She didn't look up from her work. He was quiet for a moment. Then he went to the far end and started mucking the stalls. They worked that way for an hour, each on their own task, without speaking. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It had a shape to it, like the silence of people who are used to work. When they came back to the house, she made breakfast, cornmeal porridge with coffee. He sat down and ate it. "The southeast corner fence is down," she said, when she'd poured her own coffee and sat across from him. He looked at her. "I noticed it on the walk from the road yesterday," she said. "The posts are still there, but the wires come loose. Something's been pushing through at that corner, probably the heifer on the far left, the heavier one. She's got a scrape on her left shoulder." He put his cup down slowly. "That wire came down in October. All right. I've been meaning to get to it." "I know," she said. He looked at her for a moment with something in his face she couldn't fully name. Not offense. Not gratitude either. Something more like the look a man gets when he's been asked a question he didn't realize he was avoiding. "The chicken house roof needs work too," she said before he could decide what to say. "There's light coming through near the north peak. If you get snow before you patch it, you'll lose the birds. Are you making a list?" "I keep one in my head," she said. He picked up a cup again. After a moment, he almost smiled. Not quite, but close enough that she registered it. She found the account ledger in the drawer under the kitchen counter 3 days after she arrived. She wasn't looking for it. She was looking for a proper knife. She set it on the table and opened it. The last entries was from 8 months ago. Before that, the entries were consistent, a full column in a careful hand, the tallies running even and clear. And then they'd stopped. No note, no explanation. The numbers just stopped. She looked at the numbers for a long time. The ranch wasn't failing for lack of cattle. It was failing for lack of feed costs against milk and beef sale returns. She couldn't work the full picture without knowing what he was paying on, but she could see the general shape of it, and the shape wasn't catastrophic. It was just neglected. Neglected in the specific way that things get neglected when the person responsible has stopped seeing the point. She'd seen that before too. She put the ledger back where she found it. She didn't mention it. What she did instead was start patching things. She got Tully Marsh, who ran the hardware supply in Delham, to extend a small credit on materials against future account, which he did after she explained the situation in a tone that didn't invite negotiation. She bought wire and roofing tin and a can of pine pitch. She started with the chicken house, the man. She'd started calling him by his name now, Aldrich, though only in her own head, never aloud. Came out the second afternoon and watched her for a while from the yard. "You don't have to do that," he said. "The birds'll freeze," she said. He was quiet. Then he went to the shed and came back with a second hammer and got up on the other side of the roof. They worked until the light went. It took 4 days to do the fence properly because the posts on the southeast corner had rotted at the base and needed to come out and new ones go in. He dug the holes. She ran the wire. By the end of the 4th day, her hands were raw from the pliers, and she could feel every muscle between her shoulder blades, and she was satisfied in a way she hadn't felt in over a year. The heifer who'd been getting out stayed in after that. In December, the first heifer calved early. She found the animal in distress at 2 in the morning when she got up to use the outhouse and heard something from the barn. She went in with the lantern. The calf was coming wrong, one leg back, and the heifer was panicking. She set the lantern on the hook and rolled her sleeves and did what needed to be done. By the time Aldrich appeared in the doorway, the calf was on the ground breathing, and the heifer was turning to look at it with the slow, cautious wonder of a new mother. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene. She was sitting on the stall floor, back against the wood, her arms wet to the elbows. She was tired in the particular clean way that comes after hard work that ended right. "You've done that before," he said. "Once or twice," she said. He came in and crouched down and looked the calf over. It was small, brownish, blinking at the lantern light. He checked its legs and its breathing. His hands were careful. She watched them without appearing to watch. "She'd have lost it," he said. "Probably." He sat down on the floor too, across from her, with his back against the other wall. He didn't go back inside. They sat there in the straw and the lantern light while the heifer and her calf sorted each other out. After a long while, he said, "I had a hand who knew how to do that, Cass. He was here 6 years." She waited. "He left in April," Aldrich said. "His mother was sick. He went back to Kansas to look after her." "And you didn't find anyone else," she said. "It wasn't a question." "No," he said. He didn't say anything else for a while. She didn't push it. Eventually, she said, "What happened to your shoulder?" He went very still. She'd been waiting weeks to ask it. She'd seen him favor his left side on cold mornings, the careful way he lifted certain things, the way he'd sometimes stop in the middle of a task and stand for a moment, with his eyes closed, just breathing through something. "A fence post," he said. "Winter before last, it went sideways. Took me wrong." "Did you have it looked at?" "Doc Hess in Delham and—" He said what it needed was rest. She looked at him. "Did you rest it?" Another almost smile, this one slightly more than the last. There wasn't anyone else. She understood that. She understood it more than she could say. "There is now," she said. He looked at her for a long time after that. Long enough that she looked away, at the heifer and her calf, who had found their footing and were standing close together in the warm straw. January came in hard. There was a week where the temperature dropped to where she could feel the cold through the walls of the house, and the wind pushed snow in under the door at night, and she packed a rolled towel against the gap and kept the stove going around the clock. The cattle needed tending twice a day no matter what. She went out in the mornings, and he went out in the evenings, and they overlapped at midday, checking the water trough, breaking ice, moving feed. She made soup. She made a lot of soup that month. The pantry was better stocked than when she'd arrived. She'd seen to that before the weather came, and she made use of every bit of it. She made bread. She kept the kitchen warm. She found, in an old tin in the pantry, a bottle of blackberry preserves that had been put up years ago, and she opened it one morning and put it on the table without comment and watched him stop when he saw it. He sat down slowly. "My wife made those," he said. "She waited. The summer before she died," he said. "There were more, but I used them up. I thought this one was empty." He looked at it for a moment. "She was good at keeping things." "What was her name?" she asked. "Delia," he said. He said it the way you say a word that still has weight in it. She nodded. She didn't say she was sorry, because she figured he'd heard that enough times that it had gone flat, the way words do when they get worn out by use. She poured his coffee and sat down and passed him the bread, and they ate. After a while, he said, "She was sick for 2 years before the end. I kept thinking she'd come back to herself." "People do, sometimes." "Sometimes," she said, "but not always." "No, not always." He was quiet. "By the time she died, I'd already said goodbye so many times that when it actually happened, I wasn't sure I had anything left to feel. And then I felt everything at once, and then for a while after that, I didn't feel much of anything." She looked at the table. She knew that country. She'd traveled through it herself. "That's not the same as giving up," she said. "It just looks like it from the outside." He looked at her. Something in his face shifted, not dramatically, not the way things shift in stories, all at once and obvious. Just a small, quiet change, like a window shade letting in a little more light. "I let a lot of things go," he said. "Yes," she said. "You did, I'm aware of that." "I know," she said. "I'm not saying it to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because you're not letting them go anymore." I've been watching. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked down at his coffee cup. I notice things too, he said. I'm not very good at saying them. I know that also, she said. She got up and cleared the plates. He stayed at the table. Outside, the wind was high, and the sky was white, and the morning was cold and ordinary, and the kitchen was warm. Spring came the way it always does in that part of Colorado, slowly and then all at once, like a decision that's been forming underground for months. The snow went off the south slopes first, and then the mud came deep and patient, and then one morning she walked out and the meadow past the fence was faintly green. She'd stayed through both calving seasons. She'd stayed through the fence repairs and the roof work, and the bitter January and the long February. She'd reorganized the pantry and the account ledger, and renegotiated the feed contract with the supplier in Delum, who'd been charging a rate that made no sense when she looked at what other ranches in the county were paying. She'd saved him money he didn't know he was losing. She'd found 3 problems with the irrigation channel and fixed 2 of them herself. One morning in March, she went out early to check the south herd, and on the way back she passed the garden plot behind the house. It was nothing now, bare earth, hard at the edges, last year's dead stalks still standing. Someone had kept it once. The bed lines were still there under the weeds, the careful rows of whoever had laid them out. She stood at the edge of it for a while. When she came back inside, he was at the stove, pouring coffee. I want to put the kitchen garden back in, she said, if you have no objection. He turned and looked at her. He'd been watching her more these past weeks, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, in the way of someone who has decided to pay attention. That was Delia's, he said. I know. He turned back to the stove. He was quiet long enough that she thought she'd asked wrong. Then he said, she'd have wanted it used. She nodded. She spent 3 days turning the soil. She found, wrapped in burlap in the back of the garden shed, a collection of seed packets that were old but might still come to something. Onions, beets, a variety of pole beans she didn't recognize. She planted them in rows in the warming earth and watered them from the bucket and put a piece of old fence wire down to keep the rabbits out. The beans came up first, then the onions. The beets took their time. Aldrich came out to look one afternoon when she was weeding. He stood at the edge and looked at the rows for a while. The beans are Delia's, she said without turning around. I can see that, he said. His voice was steady, but she could hear the thing behind it. Not grief, exactly, or not only grief. Something that also had room in it. Something that could hold both the loss and what was growing now. She kept weeding. He didn't leave. After a while, he crouched down and started pulling weeds on the far side of the row without being asked. They worked until the sun was low. When they went in, she made dinner, and he set the table, and they ate by the window with the last of the light coming gold across the floor. The beans would be ready in a few weeks. The beets were stubborn, but they'd get there. There was an evening in April when he asked her very carefully what she planned to do when summer came. She thought about it for a moment. She looked at the window, at the dark shapes of the cottonwoods against the last light. She had not planned anything, she realized. Or she had once. She'd come here planning to get through the winter, to have a purpose and a place to be, to get her feet under her again. She'd done that. What she hadn't planned was any of the rest of it. The way the place had started to feel like somewhere. The way the mornings had weight to them, the good kind. I don't know, she said, which was the truth. He nodded. He was turning his coffee cup in his hands. He did that when he was working up to something. I'd like you to stay, he said, if you want to, whatever that looks like to you. She looked at him. He met her eyes. He was not a man who made speeches. He was a man who dug fence post holes and sat on barn floors in the middle of the night and showed up when things needed to be done. She'd come to understand that about him, the way she understood the lay of the land and the temper of the weather, and all the other things she'd learned by paying attention. Whatever that looks like to you, she said back to him. Yes, he said, whatever that means. She looked out the window again. The cottonwoods were leafing out. The meadow past the fence was properly green now, all the way to the ridge. The beans in the garden were climbing their wire. She thought about where she'd been and where she was. She thought about the quiet that had collected in this place like good water in a good well. And how different it was from the quiet of the year after her husband died, which had been an empty quiet, a quiet made of absence. This one had something in it. This one was a quiet that two people had made together out of work and patience and the shared understanding that some things take time. "I'll stay through the summer," she said, "and we'll see what we see." He nodded. He looked at his coffee cup, and then he looked at her, and something passed between them that didn't need a word. Outside, the light was going. The stove ticked. The calf in the near barn made a sound once and then went quiet. She had come to Delham in a coat with a fraying hem and a bag she'd repacked 3 times and no clear idea of what came next. She had found a stove gone cold and a fence gone down and a man who had forgotten for a while how to want things to be different. She had lit the stove and fixed the fence. It had not been a plan. It had just been the next right thing, and then the next until the days had stacked up into something she could stand on. She picked up her cup. The country had been here a long time before either of them and would be here long after. It didn't ask for much. It just asked you to show up and do the work and stay through the hard parts. She could do that. She'd been doing it her whole life without knowing that's what it was. Outside, the cottonwoods moved in the evening wind, easy and slow, like they had no argument with anything.